In the early hours of September 1st, 1939, as the sun was barely breaking over Europe, the world stood on the edge of destruction. At precisely 4:45 in the morning, the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on the Polish garrison at Westerplatte, near the free city of Danzig. The thunder of artillery echoed across the Baltic coast. It was the first shot of a war that would soon consume the entire world. Within hours, German troops, tanks, and aircraft surged across the Polish border, launching what Adolf Hitler called a defensive action. In reality, it was a meticulously planned invasion, the opening move in a global catastrophe that would come to be known as the Second World War. For years leading up to this moment, tension had been building across Europe. The Treaty of Versailles, which ended the First World War in 1919, had left Germany humiliated, stripped of its colonies, forced to pay crippling reparations, and deprived of its military might. Many Germans believed the treaty was an injustice, and none more so than Adolf Hitler. When he rose to power in 1933, he promised to restore Germany's pride, rebuild its military, and reclaim the territories lost after the last war. His ambitions, however, reached far beyond restoration. He sought domination. By 1938, Hitler had already achieved astonishing successes without firing a single shot. He annexed Austria in the Anschluss, bringing his homeland under Nazi rule. Then came the Sudetenland crisis, when he demanded the borderlands of Czechoslovakia, claiming they were ethnically German. Britain and France, desperate to avoid another war, agreed to his demands at the Munich conference, believing they had secured peace for our time. But less than 6 months later, Hitler broke that agreement and occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia. It was clear that his ambitions could not be satisfied by diplomacy. Next on his list was Poland. Hitler wanted the city of Danzig and a land corridor connecting Germany to East Prussia, which had been separated from the rest of the Reich by the creation of Poland after World War I. The Polish government, led by Marshal Edward Rydz-Śmigły, refused to give in. Poland had guarantees from Britain and France that they would come to its defense in the event of German aggression. Hitler was furious. He had gambled before and won, but this time the stakes were higher. To avoid fighting on two fronts, he needed a deal with his ideological enemy, the Soviet Union. On August 23, 1939, the world was shocked to learn that Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union had signed a non-aggression pact. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, named after the two foreign ministers, seemed almost impossible. Two regimes that despised each other, suddenly promising peace. But hidden within the agreement was a secret protocol, one that divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. Poland was to be partitioned between the two powers. For Hitler, this meant he could attack Poland without fear of Soviet interference. For Stalin, it meant he could reclaim territory lost after World War I. The stage was set for invasion. As August turned to September, German troops massed along the Polish border. Over 1.5 million soldiers, backed by more than 2,000 tanks and 1,000 aircraft, waited for the order to strike. Hitler told his generals that he would provide a propaganda justification for war. On the night of August 31st, German operatives carried out a false flag operation known as the Gleiwitz Incident, staging an attack on a German radio station and blaming it on Polish saboteurs. The next morning, Hitler announced that Germany was at war with Poland, claiming his nation was acting in self-defense. But it was Poland that bore the brunt of German firepower. From the very first hours, the skies were filled with the roar of the Luftwaffe. Bombers struck airfields, railways, bridges, and cities. Civilians fled in panic as the Lightning War, or Blitzkrieg, unfolded with terrifying speed. This was a new form of warfare, combining rapid armored assaults with devastating airstrikes to paralyze the enemy before they could mount a defense. German panzers rolled across the countryside, bypassing strong points and cutting off Polish units from one another. Within days, Polish defenses began to crumble. Yet the Polish army fought with remarkable bravery. Despite being outnumbered, outgunned, and lacking modern equipment, they resisted fiercely. In the north, Polish troops defended the Baltic coast and the strategic Westerplatte garrison. For 7 days, less than 200 Polish soldiers held off waves of German attacks before finally surrendering, an act that became a symbol of defiance. In the south, the Polish cavalry executed daring raids against armored columns, often dismounting to fight on foot. Contrary to popular myth, they did not charge tanks with sabers. These were disciplined, mobile troops using speed and terrain to their advantage. But no amount of courage could stop the relentless force of the German war machine. Warsaw, Poland's capital, became a primary target. On September 8th, German forces reached the outskirts of the city. The Luftwaffe bombed it day and night, reducing entire neighborhoods to rubble. Civilians huddled in basements as bombs fell from the sky, and hospitals overflowed with the wounded. Yet Warsaw refused to surrender. Its defenders, soldiers, police, and civilians, fought block by block. For nearly 3 weeks, they held out against overwhelming odds, their determination inspiring the entire nation. Meanwhile, the Polish government pleaded with its allies for help. Britain and France had both promised to defend Poland in the event of an attack. On September 3, 1939, both nations declared war on Germany. But despite the declarations, there was no immediate action. In the West, the French army made only minor advances along the German border, while the British sent no significant forces to continental Europe. The period that followed would be remembered as the Phony War, a time when Europe was technically at war, but little was done to stop Hitler's aggression. For Poland, that meant fighting alone. As the days passed, Polish forces retreated eastward, hoping to regroup along the Vistula and Nareu rivers. But on September 17th, a new disaster struck. Without warning, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east. Stalin's forces crossed the border, claiming they were protecting ethnic Ukrainians and Belarusians after the supposed collapse of the Polish state. In truth, it was the secret clause of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact coming to life. Poland was now fighting two of the most powerful armies in the world, from both sides. The double invasion sealed Poland's fate. Surrounded, divided, and outmatched, Polish resistance began to falter. The last major battles took place near Lwow and the Bzura River, where Polish troops mounted a desperate counteroffensive. For a brief moment, they even pushed back the Germans, but superior air power and reinforcements crushed the attempt. By late September, most organized resistance had ended. Warsaw surrendered on September 27th after enduring 3 weeks of relentless bombardment. The city lay in ruins, its people exhausted but unbroken. On October 6th, the final Polish units capitulated near Kock, marking the end of the campaign. In just over a month, Poland had been conquered. Germany and the Soviet Union divided the country along the lines they had secretly agreed upon. The map of Europe was redrawn, and Poland disappeared once again, just as it had in the 18th century when it was partitioned by its neighbors. For the Polish people, it was not the end of their fight, but the beginning of a long, dark nightmare. Under German occupation, Poland suffered some of the most brutal atrocities of the entire war. The Nazis immediately began a campaign to destroy Polish culture and leadership. Intellectuals, priests, and community leaders were executed. Thousands were sent to concentration camps. The Jewish population, which numbered over 3 million, became the primary target of Nazi racial policy. Ghettos were established in cities like Warsaw, Krakow, and Łódź, where starvation and disease took countless lives. Within 2 years, the Nazis would begin the systematic extermination of Jews in occupied Poland. The Holocaust. Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, and other death camps would become symbols of horror that still echo through history. In the eastern territories occupied by the Soviet Union, repression took a different form but was no less cruel. The NKVD, Stalin's secret police, deported hundreds of thousands of Poles to Siberia and Central Asia. Many never returned. In the spring of 1940, the Soviets carried out one of their most infamous crimes, the Katyn massacre, where more than 20,000 Polish officers, intellectuals, and prisoners of war were executed and buried in mass graves. For decades, the Soviet Union denied responsibility, blaming the Germans, but the truth eventually came out. It was Stalin's doing. Despite these horrors, the Polish spirit endured. The government in exile, first in France and later in London, continued to represent the Polish nation. Thousands of Polish soldiers escaped through Romania and Hungary to join Allied forces. They fought valiantly on multiple fronts. In the skies over Britain, in the deserts of North Africa, and on the battlefields of Italy and France. Polish pilots in the Royal Air Force became heroes during the Battle of Britain, their skill and courage helping turn the tide against the Luftwaffe. On the ground, Polish divisions fought at Monte Cassino and later took part in the liberation of the Netherlands. Their contribution to the Allied victory was enormous, even though their homeland remained under occupation. Inside Poland, resistance grew. The Armia Krajowa, or Home Army, became one of the largest underground movements in occupied Europe. It organized sabotage, gathered intelligence, and carried out attacks against German forces. In 1944, the Polish resistance launched the Warsaw Uprising, a desperate attempt to liberate the capital before the arrival of Soviet forces. For 63 days, they fought with extraordinary bravery, but without sufficient Allied support, the uprising was crushed. The city was destroyed, and hundreds of thousands were killed. When Soviet troops finally entered Warsaw months later, little remained but ashes. Looking back, the invasion of Poland was far more than a local conflict. It was the spark that ignited a global inferno. It revealed the failure of appeasement, the danger of unchecked aggression, and the tragic consequences of betrayal. The Western powers' inability to intervene effectively in 1939 emboldened Hitler, convincing him that his enemies lacked the will to fight. In less than 2 years, much of Europe would fall under Nazi control. But it all began in Poland, with the thunder of guns at dawn and the silence of a world that was not yet ready for what was coming. When the war finally ended in 1945, Poland's suffering had been immense. Over 6 million Polish citizens had died, roughly 1/5 of the country's pre-war population. Cities lay in ruins, families were torn apart, and borders had shifted once again. The nation that had fought so bravely for its independence found itself under Soviet domination, its freedom once more compromised. Yet through decades of oppression, the memory of 1939 never faded. The courage of those who stood against overwhelming odds became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even when defeated, a nation's spirit cannot be destroyed. The invasion of Poland remains one of the most significant events in modern history. It was not just the start of a war, it was a warning to the world. It showed how fragile peace can be when nations turn a blind eye to tyranny, and how the price of complacency is often paid in blood. Today, the ruins of Westerplatte and the silent fields of Poland stand as memorials to those who fell, to the soldiers who fought, and to the civilians who suffered. Their story is not just one of tragedy, but of endurance, the story of a people who refuse to be forgotten. And so, as we look back on that September morning in 1939, we remember that history often begins not with grand declarations or heroic speeches, but with the sound of artillery at dawn, a single moment that changes everything. The invasion of Poland was that moment. It marked the end of one world and the beginning of another, darker one. A world where humanity would be tested in ways it had never imagined. It began with tanks rolling through the fields of Poland. It ended with cities in ashes and tens of millions dead. Between those two moments lies the greatest tragedy of the 20th century, a story that started quite simply with an invasion.